Hello. In this video, we're going to do some talking about the Tree of Life diagram as it's used in largely in Western Hermetic magic. So the Tree of Life, as you can see, has 10 spheres, 1 through 10. And each of these spheres represents an original divine idea. So, one of the ways that the Tree of Life can be put to use is like a card file or something where you divide things down to the 10 original ideas, and you can basically place everything in the universe within there. So it gives you a way to categorize and place things, as you will see as we go farther. I'm not going to go too deep into detail because, I could go into hours and hours and not even start to touch the subject. So this is for an overview, and it's for the purposes of beginners who are watching this, or beginners at the Tree of Life thing anyway, and want to get an idea what it is, what it's useful for. And it's definitely one of the things you need to have a good, at least some comprehension of, to be able to understand Crowley's stuff and a lot of the Western Hermetic stuff, including that of the Golden Dawn and such. This is kind of the basis of everything. So, the Tree of Life is considered to be kind of the blueprint for everything, including the universe and mankind. Mankind being the microcosm, and the universe the macrocosm. So this isn't just a theory of the cosmos or such. It's something that's actually quite useful magically, on a magical basis, and in some other ways, which the typical Western Hermetic Kabbalist doesn't necessarily know about. And I've got to say that Bardon stuff is the most, you have to be able to make some sense out of it, but it's by far the most accurate, I'm convinced, and the best system. But that notwithstanding, because this is not a video to push Bardon, so to speak. So we've got the 10 original divine ideas, Kether through Malkuth. These have emanated down from the universe, and they've emanated down in what they describe as a lightning flash, but basically there is a pathway that you can follow. It starts at the top and goes down, goes through all the sephirah, and those sephirah are emanations, and they're like holders of energy in the visual aspect of it. So you could also consider them as holding 10 different kinds of energy. And each one has its own aspects, and you can use these to categorize them or to figure out what you need to do to make an effect that you're trying to cause. And it's also breaks down the beings and spirit beings basically from God unto the earth, the Malkuth, and the kingdom of the elements. So in between the sephirah, you can see paths, and these paths are variously colored. We'll talk about those more later. The paths are generally referred to what's called the color scales, the 4 color scales. So you have the sephirah, I believe usually in the Queen scale, and the paths, I believe, in the king scale, but I might be wrong about those two. But you've got the king, queen, prince, and princess scales. And in the Hebrew numbers, which is where the color scales came from, the Hebrew aspects, it appears that to properly use the Hebrew Kaballah, you need to be able to pronounce a letter or a word in the proper color, depending on what plane you're going to pronounce it in, which is a little bit different than the way Bardon has you do it. He has you one set of colors, and you do them specifically in each plane as you wish by other means. Whereas in the Hebrew Kaballah, it appears that it was meant to be by planes. So if you wanted the Akashic plane, you would do it in Absoluth. Absoluth, that's right. If you wanted the mental plane, you do it in Braya. You want the astral plane, Yetzirah, and physical plane, Asaya, and you would use those specific colors listed in the 4 color scales. 4 sets of color scales. And so you would set up your talisman or your tool or whatever it is you want to relate to that. And the color scales for the letters are a little bit different, and I believe they're more based on astrological aspects in general. But we're talking the typical Western Hermetic type, so we don't want to go too far afield with other things. I am going to use Bardon's book as a key to the 10 original divine ideas, because Kether, Hakma, Bina, all of those should be considered in reference to the number. In other words, when interpreting these things in different color scales and things like that, you take the number as the key. So number 1, which is Kether, always means more or less the same thing. And I will read these to you from Bardon's book for the 10 original divine ideas, and whatever color scheme or whatever is being used, this is what these should refer to, the sephirah, as related to the numbers. And I'll just read these to you directly, since I, of course, don't have them all memorized. Bardon says the numbers 1 to 10 are Kabbalistic cardinal numbers corresponding to the original divine ideas by which the visible and invisible world was created. So, not only is this the creation of the world, it's also a creation of a human being and macrocosm, but it's useful because it tells you how to bring about certain results which you can get depending on the sephirah and their properties. So I think reading these will make this a lot clearer. So, as Bardon puts it, and this corresponds to Kether, number 1 is the first number in the universe and represents the highest form, i.e. God himself, whatever your conception of God is, whatever your highest conception is of the light or enlightenment of God, whatever that is for you, that is the number 1. The manifested light and everything made of it is God in his oneness, which is also reflected in all other numbers in all possible states of manifestation. Very wisely in Hebrew Kaballah, the Kether is called the crown. Whenever the deity was to be identified, this was done by the number 1. Some systems, especially the Kabbalistic system, also mention the 0, the so-called Ein Sof, but this is incomprehensible, unimaginable for man, and only serves as a hint that apart from the one thing and nothing else, and nothing higher can exist that would be comprehensible to man's spirit. Graphically speaking, number 1 is symbolized by a dot, which represents in the different systems the symbol of divine unification, of becoming one with God. And so since the circle also represents that, the circle with a dot in it, which we have as the number 6, as Sephiroth, is used as the sign of the sun, but it indicates the microcosm in harmony within the universe, the macrocosm. And he says, someone who starts his spiritual development from ignorance at once with number 1 will sooner or later end with number 10, for 1 represents the omnipotence and 10 the deepest humility. Systems of initiation which begin with number 1 are indiscriminately called monastic systems in Hermetic science. The Kabbalists should always be aware of the fact that number 1 means the highest cognition, the highest unity, the highest wisdom. All original ideas taken together form the one, God and his revolution. Apart from many other things, all evolution starts from this number. And I might point out that when you're working with the tree of life for self-development, generally that way of return is started at the bottom and winds through the various paths, as what's called the path of the serpent, to take one after the other for investigation of the tree, scrying, and helping you to get into contact with all those aspects. And so how this works, on the tree of life from number 1 to number 2, you'll notice on our diagram is the color of the letter A. The letter A goes through there. And then number 2 goes from Kether to Bina, I believe. Number 3 from Kether to Tiphereth. Number 4 from Bina to Hakma. And where the paths cross from 1 to 6 and the 2 to 3 is what they have termed Dath, or false crown of knowledge on the tree of life, because it stops short of the higher aspects. And it is also called, and been termed, the abyss has been placed here. And it has been described as a place of shells or clipoth, which are basically, well, there's a long story to that, but yeah, we won't even delve into that too much, because they're a negative aspect and we don't want to deal with the negative. I don't want to deal with the negative aspects right now. It would take a lot of explanation, and then you'd have to go into the whole cosmology and how the universe developed and all that other stuff, which is way beyond what I want to do here. I want to make this stuff so that you can use it. So normally what you would do if you wind around, you'd start from the bottom path, which is usually like the path of Tao, path number 32, and that represents the energy coming down into Malkuth, the earth, from above. If you follow the line straight on up, you notice there's a line with different colors that goes from Kether to Malkuth. And it changes colors as it goes because these are different pathways. But using that Hebrew letter and its proper color gives you access to the pathways, gives you insight into them. And if you use the Golden Dawn method of scrying, which is more or less one of the favorite ways of doing it, was going up the paths on the tree through scrying and mental and astral travel. So you would free yourself from your body and then travel into the path and go into it and then see what you learn. And what you learn would be about what happens between the two sephirah that the path connects. and the blending of those, or not. And another thing of note, before we get back to the paths and stuff completely, is you notice there are 3 horizontal paths on the tree of life. These also seem to correlate to 3 veils, or I would put it, because I use this for working on myself mostly, but I would put it they provide 3 blockages, whereas if you pierce those veils, you will get the light from above them. Otherwise, they form a sort of barrier to understanding and comprehension. But you don't want to go and pierce those before you're ready, potentially. I mean, there are all kinds of people, and I'm sure there are some saints and Mahatmas out there that would have no problem. But considering most of us aren't like that, you don't want to just remove those 3 veils. You want to go through them one at a time, and each one can be quite the powerful experience and initiatory ritual if you put them in initiations the way some of the quasi-Masonic societies and other societies have. And I might even point out, I've got to go grab my water, but I might even point out that Bardon uses the Tree of Life as a layout for his books, all 3 of them. He attributes the first 3 books to the first 3 tarot cards. Bardon says that numbers are legalities, so that everything that fits in these has to line up with the numbers, and if they don't fit the numbers properly, then it's probably in the wrong place. And Bardon, like I say, gives the best description, though Wynne Westcott did some stuff, but that's old stuff. It's also pretty good. Number 2 is the number of duality, of polarity, of the positive and negative principle. For instance, of good and evil, the truth and lie. In the material world, the 2 indicates electricity and magnetism, love and hate, light and shadow. In short, it is always pole and antipole, of which one could not exist without the other, could not be told from the other. Kabbalistically seen, it refers to God and man. Number 2 appertains to those religions which regard God as something separate, no matter whether in respect to form, shape, a specific quality, or in an original idea, whereby the dualistic principle is to be found in all kinds of existence. Number 2 also indicates the attitude towards the microcosm and the macrocosm, equal of whatever kind. Graphically, number 2 is represented by a horizontal line, not a horrible line. It is also said, by the way, in the development of humankind up to his ultimate potential, that he can only reach as far as 2. Sephirah, Hakma, wisdom. And in fact, in some places it's said that anybody who is up to the level past 4, in other words 3 or 2, has the ability, is so far advanced that they may have the ability to dematerialize their body and materialize it someplace else, that they're not based entirely on the earth at that point. So this is also not only as layout of the universe and the macrocosm, which is the human beings, it also provides a perfect layout for advancement and mystical and magical progress in development. It just uses a different way than a lot of the other ways to do it. So these things are very effective. So number 3, which is Bina, which is going to be the, which they call the Great Sea at times. It's like the great femaleness, the mother type of energy in there. And as I'll already described the number 2. So number 3, this number is graphically symbolized by a triangle. The 3 is the number of the Akasha principle, of fate, of karma, and planetarily seen, the 3 is attributed to the sphere of Saturn, and that is indeed what is attributed to that sephirah. Everything that was, that is, and will be, the mental as well as the material, originates from the Akasha principle, wherein the 3 is also to be found. Number 3 is the original idea of procreation, which manifests itself in the plus and minus, i.e. in the Manu woman, who in unification beget the 3rd, the child. In man himself, the 3 is also represented by spirit, soul, and body. 3 is also the number of intuition. All religious systems and their fateful manifestation have derived from this number. 3 is the number of life and death. It is the number of cognition in its highest form. So that's what you get when you're talking about Bina. Though it's also, though Bardon doesn't mention it specifically, it's also considered in general and used in Western Hermetics as the great female, the great C. And Hakma would be the male aspect. Bardon doesn't place such preference on the polarities of them with regard to each other. Every sephirah is female regards to the one above it, which means that every sephirah receives the input from above and passes it out, so it's male in the sense of passing out the influence to the other sephirah, and female in the fact that it receives them in. So the sephirah are thus balanced in that fashion also. Number 4, and this is the number of mercy on the tree of life, or Geburah, the sphere of Jupiter. As Bardon says, this number is the highest number for the Kaballah expert as far as practice is concerned. And let's parenthesize this with Bardon's Kaballah expert, because it's clear that other real, genuine systems of Kaballah have existed, even if they are lost today. And one of the differences, like I say, is about the color scales. Rather than just be able to use the planes directly, they're expected to use the color and such for it, apparently, in that Kabbalistic system. And I have not been initiated into that, so I'm, well, probably talking out of as much information as anybody else does who's on there. There are a lot of it is related to Hebrew, but I don't really want to go there. I want to keep it as useful as possible, and being as useful doesn't require the Hebrew letters nearly as much as it does the numbers, because the numbers are the lawfulness, and that's I'll quit repeating myself now. In the planetary system, number 4 is attributed to Jupiter. This number represents all 4 basic elements: fire, water, air, and earth. The 4 points of the compass: east, west, north, and south. The 4 fundamental features of God: omnipotence, wisdom, love, and immortality, perfect consciousness. 4, therefore, is the number by which everything was made and realized in the micro and macrocosm. It is the number of law, order, justice, and realization. At the same time, 4 is the number of everything that was created in the invisible and visible worlds. As a divine original idea, number 4 means highest wisdom, though it is not the sephirah termed wisdom. Don't want to confuse anybody. That is sephirah number 2, Hakma. It is also the number of length, width, height, and depth. Graphically or symbolically, number 4 is represented by a cross whose arms are of equal length, or by an equilateral quadrangle. Fancy word for a square. And then you reach number 5, which has some connections to human consciousness too. This number, which would be Geburah on the tree, the red sphere, this number is the perfect representation of the microcosm, that is, of man in all of his phases and forms of existence. In number 5, the working of the 4 elements is reflected, which is directed by the fifth element, the Akasha principle. The intuitive Kabbalist will know why it is that 5 not only symbolizes man by the elements within, but also by its Kabbalistical numerical order, for 5 is the half of 10, and 10 stands for the whole creation. The microcosm, i.e. the miniature world man, must be represented in its completeness by half of 10. Since the working of the 4 elements, ruled by the Akasha principle, is represented by the number 5, this number also represents the power and the might appertaining to the planet Mars. Consequently, everything that expresses an active power or might is in harmony with the number 5. All influences that are affected by the might and power of a human being appertain to this number. The whole active magic appertains to this numerical order. Number 5 is graphically represented by an equilateral pentagram, also called a pentagon, or as we know, the pentagram is not the same as a pentagon, but that's okay. But you've got the Akasha in control of the 4 elements, so there's your pentagram. And as far as speaking, there was somebody that was asking about hierarchies of beings and things like that. So these start with, in the Kaballah, the planetary attributions. So we're starting with Saturn. Sephirah number 3 is the first planetary attribution. So that would be where you would contact the beings or judges of humanity, or the judges of, not just humanity, but the beings that judge all of everything. So it's not recommended to go there. According to Bardon, it has a heavily depressing quality of a nightmare, so you need to really have a real need to do it, or be aware of what you're doing. This isn't one that a person generally just evokes or works with directly without some getting accustomed to it. So you got the beings of Saturn, and then for Kaballah, you've got the beings of Jupiter. So they would be in that hierarchy. So if you want to contact the beings of Jupiter, you look at the sephirah number 4 and see what its qualities are. And generally it's a blue color, a nice Jupiterian blue, so you know where the colors come from for these things. And those can be useful if you're trying to find a stone that will help you work. You bring money into your life or good fortune, something of that nature. You might look for one that would be a good blue color to harmonize with Jupiter. So you can use these things to find out how to you can use this to practically make magic and to understand what you're doing. And so you don't have to have pre-made spells that other people have come up with, or things that have been used in the past. So those do have the advantage of the more they have been used, the higher of a charge they'll have to start with, and the easier those forces will be to be used. So I guess there's nothing to add there to that. So number 5, of course, is the pentagon and the pentagram and the symbol of protection. And the beings of Mars reside there. And they deal with not only things like war, but they also deal with healing salves that would heal wounds from wars and things like that. It's set up in rather primitive imagery, but it gets the idea across. And it's not only, you have to watch out. None of these are negative. They all have positive aspects and negative aspects. War, in most cases, people would say is a negative aspect. But Mars also contributes to your metabolism, your blood, all that, keeping working properly, keeping your blood within your body, that kind of thing. So you really couldn't live without it. So it's not just making war, so you need to watch out, because the same thing with Saturn. It's not just judging and judginess. It also has to do with an earthy, heavy quality, firmness, strength, solidity, and some of those other earthy qualities that aspects of Saturn in the physical world have. And lead, for example, is usually attributed to Saturn. And as we know, lead is very heavy because it has that heaviness. So none of these, if I mistakenly describe them in a one-sided fashion, I apologize, because they are not, and they are all balanced internally. And the Qliphoth were supposedly what was left after the emanations settled out into their proper forms. So it's kind of left off stuff like God's garbage pit or something. I don't know how I feel about that idea, so I haven't investigated that far, because my goal is not to discover the ancient Hebrew Kaballah. It's to use Bardon's practically. And practically, by that he means Kabbalistic words that will perform a function by simply saying it and, well, pronouncing it properly, I should say. It's a lot more than just saying it. You have to use every aspect of your personality simultaneously to pronounce one of these words and to make it have power. But Bardon is the only one that I have seen that talks about that specifically. And it's the real practical use of Kabbalistic letters and words, which are, like I was saying, referred to the paths. But the first 10 can also refer to the sephirah that they come from, because they contain that in the path, and also the sephirah they're going to. Anyway, not to get too confusing, though this can be. We'll go to number 6. This is Sephiroth. So this is the solar symbol, the dot within the circle, as we described earlier, the microcosm within the macrocosm. In comparison to number 5, representing the microcosm, i.e. man in his perfection, number 6, on the other hand, represents the microcosm in its perfection. Graphically, number 6 is expressed by an equilateral hexagram. Seen from the Kabbalistic angle, the two interlacing triangles point to the manifested light, to life, but also to the possible connection to God. The hexagram is also the symbol of the magician who, after having struggled through the sixth sphere, the sphere of the sun, may attain his connection to God. May attain the connection to God, pardon me. This means that the Kabbalist must arise aloft to the Kabbalistic 6, the sun sphere, spiritually as well as psychically, if he wants to achieve a connection to the number 1, i.e. to God. 6 is also the visible symbol of the Hermes plate, which starts with the word saying that which is above is also that which is below. The lower triangle of the hexagram denotes, in the magical sense, man with his three-dimensional aspect of body, soul, and spirit. The upper triangle, the hexagram points to the three-dimensional unification and influence of divine power, divine virtues, etc., mentally, astrally, and physically, in their connection from above. As already mentioned, number 6 represents the sun, called Sephiroth in Kaballah. From a physical point of view, it is our sun around which the planets circle. Apart from this, macrocosmic magic, the magic of the spheres, is also expressed by the number 6. Many more analogies to number 6 could be indicated, but the examples given above will be sufficient to the Kabbalist. And so we come to sphere 7, the sphere of Netzach, or of Venus, which is, of course, what you're after if you want love spells, undoubtedly. So, number 7 is the number of harmony, fertility, propagation, and growing. It is also the number of love with all of its phases, no matter whether the lowest form of love or the highest cosmic aspect of love is in question. Mercy, benevolence, virtuousness, and happiness are also aspects of love and therefore appertain to number 7. Apart from this, 7 is also the number of beauty, purity, and harmony. With regard to astrology, 7 is the number of Venus, so all methods and practices of the Venus magic, scale magic, by which he means like musical magic, also belong to this numerical category. Amongst other things, the 7 basic notes, the octave, are also analogous to number 7, and so are the 7 tatwas, the 7 states of maturity, and he has in parentheses the chakras. The graphic representation of number 7 is an equilateral heptagon, or septangle. There are, however, other symbols for number 7, for instance, a great triangle with a square in its middle, or vice versa, a square with a triangle in its middle, depending on the number to be entered graphically. Obviously, you have the 4 and the 3, or the 3 and the 4, and the meanings of those, so these things add together like the numbers do. That's a whole other subject. The square is also sometimes replaced by a cross with arms of equal length, which is drawn in the middle of a triangle. By doing this, one gets 7 points alluding to number 7. Many other things are analogous to this number, as for instance 7 spectral colors, the colors of the rainbow, etc. Number 8, Had. This is the number of Mercury and where your mind resides. According to Bardon, this is the number of mind, the intellect, and thus the number of knowledge. Everything that comes under the scope of the intellect appertains to the number 8. It is also the number of the spirit of the mental body. In astrology, number 8 is analogous to Mercury. Its symbolic expression is the octagon formed by 2 interlacing squares. One square symbolizes the activity of the 4 elements, and the other square symbolizes man with his quadrupolar attitude, the quadrupolar magnet, which is equipped with the 4 fundamental features of the spirit, volition, intellect, feeling, and consciousness, without which there is no knowledge. The octagon is also a symbol of the positive and negative effects of the elements in the micro and macrocosm. It stands to reason that any theoretical knowledge besides any knowledge of magic, Kaballah, or any other science of that type pertains to this number. And I might point out, since I was kind of gradually feeding in stuff about using these for magical workings, a perfect example is expressed right here. If you want to make a seal for Mercury or to invoke Mercury effects, like say you need a seal to help you win or to help you pass a quiz at college or something, something you needed to really invoke the mind for, you might start by making a seal out of the octagon formed by 2 interlacing squares. And use that as the basis and then charge that up with the Mercury energy, which has a color, all the rest of the aspects. In astrology, number 8 is analogous to Mercury. It's also the number of spirit of the mental body, if I hadn't said that. Its symbolic expression, one square symbolizes the legality of the 4 elements, and the other square symbolizes man with his quadrupolar attitude, the quadrupolar magnet. Okay, which I also already read. I apologize. Number 9, Esau, the sphere of the moon. Number 9 is graphically symbolized by 3 equilateral triangles interlacing one another. It represents the original idea of the astral world, the astral body, and everything else pertaining to the astral, including all of its analogies, characteristics, etc. That includes all the beings residing on the astral plane. There they are. They're all in the foundation, Yesod. At the same time, 9 is the number of motion, of rhythm, and thus of life in its most subtle form. And one of the aspects of this that is obvious if people think about it is the rhythm of women's bodies and their menses and its correlation with the moon spheres, and being on her moon, of course, as it's called. Under its aspects come all the practices of astral magic, of the magic of nature, and mummies. The 9 is the number which prepares every situation in the astral for the material world. Number 9 is analogous to the moon, and everything coming under the moon sphere and its influence is symbolized by it. Number 9 is, of course, the highest number 2, and any number can be brought to the units 1 to 9 by addition. Although number 9 also has many analogies, these few indications will have to do for a student of the Kaballah. And we'll go into number 10. And number 10 is the lowest and the highest sphere simultaneously. It contains number 1 within it, and some of them add, but in another fashion, because Alcove is the kether of the next plane down. So if you're talking the tree of life sphere in the middle plane, and then you got all your astral aspects and all your physical aspects. But Bardon explains this well, so I'll read this. It is the reflection of number 1 in its roughest form, 10. 10 is the number of physical matter of the number of realization of the cohesion of the earth element with all its aspects. Not without good reason is number 10 called the kingdom in Hebrew Kaballah. 10 is the number by which everything has been created physically, i.e. the matter in its densest form in the micro and macrocosm is to be understood. The whole human body in its material form is subject to the number 10. Logistically also the mineral kingdom with all of its states of density, raw minerals, iron ore, etc. Furthermore, also the vegetable kingdom and the animal kingdom. In short, everything that we can perceive with our material senses. Number 10 points to the beginning of physical matter. And this is important right here. It is the starting point on the way to God. You start here, you go up. And there's a lot to say there. And we've already got enough time in this video. I'd better not add a bunch more yet. All the influences of the original ideas described earlier in this book, starting from the incarnation of God on our earth down to the deepest materialization, i.e. condensation, are described by the number 10, expressed by the number 10. Number 10 is graphically figured by the alchemical symbol of a circle with a cross consisting of 8 arms in its middle, contrary to number 1, which is usually symbolized by a dot or a circle as the sign of infinity. However, number 10 may also be expressed symbolically by a square with a circle drawn in its middle. And some people will remember old references to the squaring of the circle as an aspect in Kaballah, as an aspect of the great work, they called it. And people who have studied the Tarot of the Buddha will notice that Paul Foster Case uses this symbol a lot in a lot of his Tarot figures, the crosses with a circle around them. There are a couple figures in which he uses a cross with a circle around it. A number of others, though, with the 8-wheel design, which is specifically from Alcove. So these symbols have also been used throughout generations and years for these things. So this is not brand new knowledge, but to my understanding, Bardon is the only one I've ever read who brings it all together and makes it make sense. And it does once you start getting it, but it can be tough. If somebody wants to do some real research that's very useful on this point, I would recommend a copy of the Sephirah. There are many copies. One that I know is good and trustworthy as far as the qualities and things that it discusses is the Sephirah by Wynne Westcott. And this is an old translation. But get something that's a decent translation, because if you get it and then you study Bardon's work, you can start seeing the connections, and it'll make the Sephirah will make a lot more sense to you in light of what Bardon says. And it's like reading a second language, learning a second language, almost like learning alchemy or something. But it doesn't have to be. And Bardon simplifies things a good deal, believe it or not. You have to see the complicated versions. So we'll go ahead and read about 10 a little more. As a starting point on the way to God, all the influences of the original ideas earlier in this book are expressed by the number 10. Circle the cross. Each science, including Hermetics, proceeds from number 10. Kabbalistically seen, 10 is not only the number of the material world, but also of the zone girdling the earth. And this is, as far as Bardon goes directly considering the numbers as related to the sephirah, he puts a lot more emphasis on the actual practice than the theoretical knowledge, which can seem like just an overwhelming amount of very hard to understand information, and especially trying to get a understanding of it from the Hebrew standpoint is very difficult. And the fact of the matter is, I believe that Hebrew Kaballah has been virtually the real Hebrew Kaballah used like Bardon's Kaballah, where the power of the words actually accomplish things. And they're so powerful you don't say one properly unless you wish to accomplish that deed. And there's been arguments about the proper pronunciation, but Bardon gives an understanding of what that means. His third book, he recommends people have made it to at least the eighth chapter in his first book before commencing with it. But he does point out that it can be used by anyone if you have stellar and noble motives for its use. And right now, my primary use has been for self-development or trying to help other people. So I'm not trying to do any of the bad stuff that you could do with Kaballah if you wanted to, because it's the way Bardon gives it. It's a very effective tool set, and eventually, when I learn it well enough, I expect it will be about the only kind of magic I do. I'm sure I will still use magic mirrors and things occasionally, but I think it will become my major thing, especially with all the aspects it gives you to easily work with personality and the mental plane and your mental aspects and all that. I consider it a complete treasure trove. All right, I better stop this right here. So blessed be. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day or week or night, whatever it is. And thank you for watching my video. Blessed be.